Hey, welcome to the Table Talks podcast. I'm here with Pastor Steven Zaire. We're continuing together our journey through our At the Movies series. Every summer, we spend a few weeks together unpacking some of our favorite films, how they connect with the human experience, ultimately the spiritual principles we want to draw out of them, and what they say to us about God and his story. So Steven shared our second movie of our series. It's a movie that didn't make quite a splash, I think, in the movie world. A lot of people that I talk to actually have never heard of this. But honestly, it became one of my favorite movies I saw in the past year or so. It's the unlikely story of the guy who invented the Flamin Hot Cheetos. So it begins with Richard Montañez, who's trying his best to find work, to leave his gang life behind, to better take care of his family. Yep. After a ton of struggle, he finally gets a job at the Frito-Lay's company as a janitor, and eventually he becomes the ingenious mind that comes up with the Flaming Hot Cheetos. I'm curious, when the idea for this movie was pitched to you, like what stood out to you with the story as a whole, and you saw the movie and all that, like first time you saw it, first impression?
Yeah, well, I thought when you guys pitched me the idea of Flamin' Hot, I was like, no, we're not actually doing that. And then you told me just go watch the movie. And
it's not a rated R film. It's not rated X either.
No. And I was like, well, I don't even know where to watch it. They're like, it's on Disney Plus. I was like, on Disney Plus? Like, okay. And so I remember sitting down in my living room one night and watching, and felt so much emotion and connection and pull to this story, and recognizing how many of us have connection to that storyline that Richard Montañez walked through, and the dynamic of how many of us are in the middle of that version of our story. And it was just a blast to see this movie that was brought together, culminating what so many people can deal with in the midst of, overcoming temptation, walking through struggling times, how to have adversity, not be the thing that brings you down, but the thing that actually helps you propel forward into your life. And so it's a great movie. If you haven't watched it, like, you need to go watch it. And, I recommend it to everybody now.
And I think I felt awesome. All the emotions during the movie.
Yeah, literally.
I mean, laughed so much. Such a funny movie. I cried. The relationship dynamic with his dad specifically was so raw and real, inspiring. Yeah. Gives you a grander vision for what could happen through your life. I mean, it really is a big story. So highly recommend. Great film. You talked about how there's countless examples in the Bible, right? Because you did a parallel to the story of Joseph. Yeah. And you talked about there's many examples in the Bible of God using unsuspecting people to achieve really great things. Yeah. So that was like the parallel for you with the story of this movie. And you used the story of Joseph in Genesis. And so your first point was about embracing your calling. Yeah. So here's my question for you, because Joseph, in his story, he seemed to have a pretty strong conviction from God on his identity and on his call. Yeah. Right? I mean, in the face of all these things, he was pretty firm. Like, he embraced his identity. What if we don't? Like, what if we're not clear, or we don't have that sense of conviction, but we still feel like lost? Like, how do we discover that?
Yeah. I think that the word calling is a unique, it's definitely unique to the Christian world of like, oh, that's my calling.
That's true.
And it's something that, a pastor talks about, or you hear, but I think we all know about that thing inside of us where if we had $10 million in the bank and had all of the ability to kind of go do whatever we want, what is that thing that we would want to do? Like, if we didn't have to worry about the risk of failure, and we feel like there's something inside of us that we want to do, that is that sense of destiny, that sense of calling that is, I think, within all of us. And I don't think it's that hard to search for, because so many people go to their 9-to-5 jobs, but have these unbelievable, amazing passions on the side, or there's a dynamic of their personality that flourishes in certain environments over others. And I think that if we really took a 3,000, 4,000 foot view of our life, or we asked the people around us, all of us would be able to find something inside of us that points to that connection and that greater purpose, not just for our own self-benefit.
Yeah.
Most of the time, I think calling is actually not connected to your benefit alone. It is something that you end up benefiting others most. It's almost like you were created to do that thing for your benefit, but mostly for the benefit of other people.
Yeah.
And Joseph, in his story, he had a strong conviction, and he was so young, he didn't understand that his calling was actually to benefit hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in the midst of a great famine and save his family's life. And I think that sometimes it's hard because we want to do that thing or we want to go after it, but the risk and stepping out in place of fear is often what holds so many of us back.
I think that sometimes we also confuse calling with other things.
Yeah.
Like you could confuse your calling even with your career.
Totally.
Right? Your calling doesn't have to be related to your job.
Yeah.
You could be called to be an artist or whatever, but not be the primary thing that keeps paying the bills for you.
Yeah.
Right? I also think of this paradigm of the difference between your identity, your calling, and your assignment.
Yeah, that's really good.
And there are things that were assigned for a period of time. I think your job is one of those.
Yeah.
Right? But there's a calling that is like a greater purpose for what you're meant to do with your life. And I think I agree. It is related to your investment in others.
Yeah.
I think when you see what you do benefit others, I think that's what is refreshing.
Yes.
That's what blesses us in return. And then there's our identity, which is related but separate from it as well. And I think when we mix up all those things, that's when we get ourselves in trouble, right? You mix up your identity with your seasonal job. And then when that falls apart, then your identity crumbles behind it as well. Yeah.
It's a really powerful thought. Like I can see this in the through line of my life that I've done a lot of different things. I was an accounting major out of college and I worked in the financial world.
I could not imagine you being an accountant.
I know. I was not the greatest accountant and I was much better at talking. And I jumped into sales in high tech and I spent several years doing that. And then I became my own business, a small business owner, owning a restaurant. And throughout all of that and did some consulting before I ever became a pastor. But as I look back on all of those dynamics, the thing in each of those scenarios that I thrived in the most was the communication dynamic when I interacted with people.
Yeah.
Whether it was a client and trying to hear their actual need instead of what's beneficial to me as trying to sell, or the client that I was servicing during an audit, or the people I was serving a salad to at our restaurant. Like everything I did was connected to benefiting others. And that's where I got the most joy, was from my interaction with people, which comes back to my call of it is my job to love people and to point them towards the God that loves me.
Yeah.
And that assignment looks differently at times.
Yeah.
And right now my assignment is here at Echo as a part of this community and continuing to spread that message. But it is the same exact call that has been there forever in loving people.
That's a great through line that you can share through that. That's a good way to illustrate it. So you share a lot. There's adversity that comes along the way, right? When we're pursuing our calling. Joseph, in the story of Joseph, he faced a lot of oppositions, obviously.
Yes.
So what are some ways that you can embrace that calling even when you're facing that kind of opposition? Because I think oftentimes we can pursue, right? Like you said, like sometimes we can get so anxious about the what ifs and how we're going to survive if we go all in these things and the risks that come with it. Sometimes we face obstacles and we get like, well, it must not be God's will, right? And Joseph could have had plenty of opportunities to feel that way as well.
Oh, yeah.
So how do we go about I guess it's not just overcoming, but it's also discerning, because sometimes it is not meant to be, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult dynamic to walk through. When you look at the stories that are presented to us in the narrative of the Bible, which is God's love letter to his people, all throughout, from the very beginning all the way to the end, it is people overcoming trial, and having God's hand intervene in so many unique ways. Like I think back to in the Babylonian exile during the Old Testament, you've got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Yeah.
These guys that won't bow down to an idol because they know I'm supposed to stay loyal to God. Now, like that's a very clear, you're about to die.
Yeah.
And they go, it is worth it. And people will be like, no, like God doesn't want you to die. But like,
yeah, God knows my heart.
like, maybe he wants to use your adversity for others. And like they get thrown into the fire. And the story is that they see a fourth man inside there. They come out and they don't have one hair on their hair burn. It's like sometimes the adversity in a situation is actually your sign that God is saying that's the right thing.
Yeah.
And he's pointing you towards it. Now, there are a lot of scenarios in which I don't agree with that. Like if there's abuse or there's other things like that are not healthy, like, but sometimes a difficult thing might be God propelling you into something greater. Like for me personally, having in multiple scenarios in my past, I have left large sums of equity and financial benefit on the table, and lost it because God put on mine and my wife's heart a new shift or a new assignment. And had I stayed a little longer, I would have vested fully, which would then have set up our future and been great. But because our obedience to say, no, he's saying now, like we feel it in our souls. We've prayed, we've fasted, and we know it's the right move. And people thought we were crazy. But then the door opened.
Yeah.
And I can look back on that and I could have regret on like, oh, I missed out on all these opportunities. But I look and I see my life and I go, it's not free from trouble. It's not the best that it could be. But there is a clear understanding of, I feel like I'm in God's will. And that is a much better place to be than in a place of regret. And we had this one last thing on that. So when we were moving back from Minnesota to the Bay Area, so we sold our business and we moved back to the Bay Area feeling like God was calling us into the Bay Area to do ministry. And we didn't have a job. We had no guarantee of anything. And everybody kept asking, well, what if you're wrong?
Yeah.
What if you're wrong?
Yeah.
And I was like, we might be. We might be. But I would rather be obedient and wrong than disobedient and feel like I have security. So I'd rather, if I really feel strongly God is encouraging us, and it wasn't like, go jump off that building and see if he catches you. It was like, hey, make a family move and go to a place and I'll open a door for you to step in and do the thing that you felt like you've always intended to do as part of your calling. And it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
I had to drive Lyft for a while when we got here, but then eventually the door opened within the timeline of what we asked God to do. And it was unbelievable. And now I can tell that story backwards in hindsight and go, it is because of that obedience that I feel like God did what he did. And so you're constantly having to evaluate this is struggle, but I think it's worth it.
Something as you were talking about being obedient, but being wrong. That's a fascinating line of thinking. To wrestle with, because it makes me think about the way we discern the will of God, which is a very difficult thing to say very clearly, like, this is what God desires, and to be completely black and white. I think very few people can actually say, God told me to, with 100% certainty that this is the way. But the thing that we can be sure of that is within God's desires is that he desires for our hearts to be near to his.
Yes.
He is after our obedience. He's after our hearts more than anything else. And I think the part of your story is, even if you were wrong, it wasn't an aspiration for your heart to draw closer to God's. And I think in that scenario, whatever you do, I think falls within God's will for you.
Yeah, he'll always reroute us.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you make a wrong turn because you thought, I thought the GPS was saying here. And it was at that next light.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it will reroute you. It will bring you back. And but God will use your yes
Yeah.
as an opportunity to take you on a journey back to him.
Yeah.
And I think that is the beauty of life. It
Yeah.
is a series of yeses and nos in a journey of trying to come close to the heart of God.
That's good. Speak a little bit about this, like the whole adversity. Sometimes that you talked about, it's actually even a part of God's plan. Like the adversity you're facing is part of him shaping or whatever it is in that discovery to your calling or in fulfilling your calling. Why is that? Why does God make adversity a part of his desires for our lives? Why can't it just be like chocolate ice cream, like along the way? Right?
Yeah. I think my main thought on that particular thing is it's a dependence on him.
Yeah.
When you sacrifice or you walk into a difficult situation, there is a dependence on trusting that God is going to walk you through it, or that he is in that scenario, or he's going to open the door. Like this happens every single month for our family when we tithe.
Yeah.
Like being in ministry, I'm not making tech money like I used to. And I've got 2 kids and a wife and, rent to pay and things like that. And
PG&E.
Yeah. Which
Silicon Valley
going through the roof, like my water bill was $400 because we tried to let the kids play on a slip and slide this month. And so it's like, I was like, what the heck? Like, come on, it's water. But every month I take 10% of my income and I say, hey, God, I could really use this.
Yeah.
But I trust, and my dependence is on you way more than it is on my ability to use that sum of money for my benefit.
Yeah.
I would rather trust and be obedient that I'll be okay. I have enough. And I think that's the heartbeat of it is this dependence of saying like, I could do it on my own. So many of us can do so many things on our own. We have some of the most talented people in the world that are unbelievably skilled. But if you do it all without God's presence, you're missing God.
Yeah.
And I would rather try to do things with his presence at a cost to me than without it altogether.
Yeah. The other side of sacrifice that I think about and in God's plan for it in our lives is it's also a way for us, like God made us in his image and he himself has exemplified what sacrifice looks like. And so we get to partake in some ways in identifying with Christ and living the life that he's called us to. Yeah. And it's sacrifice, if it's in pursuance of our calling, like you were saying, is to the benefit of others.
Yeah, it's so good. I think even in the movie, this clip wasn't as a part of our message, but there's a portion in the movie where Richard Montañez is trying to figure out what to do. Yeah. He has these layoffs happening. There's threat of the entire factory closing down. And his wife has this candle lit as like a reminder of the presence of God. And he's sitting in his living room and the candle goes out. And he's like, no. We got to light the candle. Like he has this moment of like, I can't do it without you. Yeah. And his wife has been the one that's always been pushing towards God. Yeah. But now Richard is saying, we have to have God in this scenario.
He was actually making fun of her for it in the beginning, for lighting the candle every day, for doing this. And now he's like, no, we got to do that.
And then that is the moment where I think he invited God's presence into his situation. Yeah. And then that is where things started to unlock for him and new ideas and new thought process. And I think that's half of the battle is we can navigate life all on our own and forget or have God as this outside piece dynamic of our life. But it's that reminder to invite him into our lives on the daily. Yeah. Sometimes in the rough moments. And be reminded of like every breath we have is a gift from him. I woke up this morning and I slept all night long, but I didn't think about breathing. And I woke up and like he gave me another breath. Yeah. Like inviting him into my day and saying, hey, help me navigate the meetings I have, or help me walk through what it's going to look like to parent. Or last night, literally, my son was up for half the night sick, not feeling good. And so, Lord, help me on less sleep today function and help me help him. And I don't know what to do in these scenarios. And I think it's sometimes being aware of, we can just go, or we can see and go, every opportunity in life is an opportunity for God to be in it.
Yeah.
And that is sometimes where there's even some of those bigger breakthroughs for calling. It's how we get the strength to overcome the adversity and keep pushing forward.
Yeah. All right, last question for you.
Yep.
One of your points was about how when we maintain integrity, it unlocks favor. I wonder if you could unpack this concept of favor, because we just talked about, right? Pursuing God's will sometimes, maybe often, means you face adversity.
Yeah.
So what's the discernment then between those things? Do we get favor or do we get adversity? How do we explain to me that concept of favor. What does that mean?
Yeah, we have a statement in our house that I am trying to ingrain in my children. We do the right thing when no one's looking. That idea of, if nobody else is around me and I could get away with it, will I still do the right thing? Because that means at the core of our character, there is integrity. And when we have integrity, it unlocks this ability to experience more of God's presence, because there is no separation, because we've done the right thing. Now, favor doesn't mean, you're going to drive home and you're going to get a BMW today. But in Joseph's story, he is in prison after he is imprisoned for doing the right thing when no one was looking.
Yeah.
So he clearly is going through adversity. But then it says, and the Lord was with Joseph in prison, and the prison guard saw the benefit of the Lord in Joseph. And so he put him in charge of everything. So he was in prison, but he had favor unlocked. So one dynamic of his life was still being caged, but inside of that cage, there was joy, there was peace, there was freedom. It's the same thing when Paul is in chains singing praises and the gates open in the jail cell, and the guard goes to kill himself because he thinks everyone's going to escape, so he's going to die. And they're going, no, we're here.
Yeah.
There was joy in the midst of struggle. One of the things that I think is so beautiful in our world is sometimes when you see people with terminal illness, they are clearly walking through something extremely difficult. But for so many people who are in that scenario, when there's a dynamic inside of them that goes, I'm okay. I know where I'm going.
Yeah.
So I live with peace. So it's to know you're going to die, but to live in the peace of knowing where you're going, that's favor.
Yeah.
Adversity and favor can live in the same moment at the same exact time. And they look differently, but there's so much benefit in the midst of life when you can see the peace, the joy that comes in the midst of trouble. That is the thing of God. That's the secret sauce of why are you, your life looks insane.
Yeah.
Why are you smiling?
Yeah.
It's I got the joy of the Lord. What do you mean you got the joy of the Lord? This whole thing, it's awful. But man, I know God's got something in it for me. And because of that, I'm choosing to do the right thing in this scenario. I'm choosing to go out about this thing in the right way. So at the end of the day, I can hold my head high and say I've got nothing hidden before God. I've got nothing hidden before people. And I can live in peace, not trying to pick up the pieces or figure out what I did. And that's a big deal to me.
Yeah.
It's a big deal to my family. And I think it's a big deal to God.
Yeah. A lot of thoughts going through my mind as you were saying this. I was trying to process what you were saying, to put it into words concisely in my mind. The integrity that you're speaking about really is about how do you how do you live your life in the face of adversity? Mm-hmm. And the favor I'm witnessing, or I'm seeing in your story, is the favor is the fruitfulness that comes on the back end of the adversity.
Yeah.
And that fruitfulness is not necessarily something for our benefit, like what we've been talking about. Yeah. It's oftentimes part of your calling in the benefit of others. And I think about it in my own life, the times where I've been the most fruitful, or I've seen myself even grow the most, like in my character, in the depth of who God's made me.
Yeah.
Has always come in the face, or on the backside of facing something that was incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And it's how do you maintain your integrity through that season that then you're able to see the fruitfulness. Because you can be bitter and angry through your adversity. What good comes out of it at the end of it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And when you read the narrative of the Bible, it is constantly the example of people who have maintained integrity and unlocked God's favor versus those that have not.
Yeah.
Like the story of King David is like one of the most beautiful pictures of that. Like the dude did so many dumb, stupid things, but he's known as a man after God's own heart, which like makes me feel so much better. Like, oh, I am so dumb at times and I'm so broken, or I do not have it all together. But if he was a king and he like all of this other stuff, like the Lord spoke to him, like, okay, like I'm all right. But for the first like 10 years of his anointed king life, he had to be on the run, hiding in caves.
Yeah.
But he maintained his integrity during the whole time.
Yeah.
And then he was able to, when God's timing was right, to step into his kingship. But that didn't come without adversity and problems due to some of the problems that he didn't maintain his integrity when no one was looking, and it brought on trouble. And so there was this dynamic, this back and forth of he was a man after God's own heart who had and experienced the presence of God and lived with the Holy Spirit, but yet he made mistakes. He made great decisions, and you can see the difference in his life on both. And I can look at my story, or I think we could all look at our stories, and we can all see that there is a narrative there when the right thing is done, we can see God's favor. And when it's not done, we can see our stupidity.
Yeah.
Maybe not everybody else's stupidity, but my own stupidity.
We see it, Stephen.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts, your stupidity, your silliness with us, your inputs. That's really valuable. I hope you were encouraged by our conversation, by the message from Stephen this past week. Make sure you join us live on Sunday mornings for services at one of our locations or online. Just a reminder that during the At the Movie series, we are on our Church Online platform at Echo.Church. We have our morning services that are 8:30, 10 a.m., and 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, but we're also streaming it throughout the week for you to be able to view it at your time that works best for you. So make sure you check out the service times that are there as well. And the last thing, I just want to encourage you to join and continue in the conversation with us in these. If you have further questions you want to ask, you can drop a comment, or you can join our Discord community where we have lots of people that are there engaging. It's a great way to build new friendships, relationships, and connect further throughout the week. Stephen, thanks for joining us. Everybody, we'll see you on the next one. Bye.